Unabomber. When genius turns against the world, a true story of intellect, ideology, and isolation, the 17-year manhunt that exposed the dark side of human brilliance. May 25, 1978, Northwestern University, Evanston, Illinois. It looked like a normal package, small, rectangular, addressed in neat handwriting. The label suggested it had been sent from one campus department to another. A security guard, Terry Marker, found it in the hallway and decided to return it to the supposed sender. When he opened it, the device exploded. The blast was small but powerful enough to send nails and shrapnel into his hands and face. Smoke filled the air, leaving behind the acrid smell of chemicals and burned paper. It was the first clue that something, or someone, far more sinister was at work. At first, the police thought it was a prank gone wrong, but as the investigation unfolded, they began to suspect that the bomber wasn't an impulsive student or a lab technician. This was something else entirely: calculated, patient, and deliberate. That moment marked the beginning of a 17-year reign of terror, a campaign of bombings that would terrorize professors, executives, and ordinary citizens across the United States. The man behind it all was Theodore John Kaczynski, a former math prodigy turned hermit. To the world, he would become known by a name that struck fear into every mailroom in America. Ted Kaczynski was born on May 22, 1942, in Chicago, Illinois, to Wanda and Theodore Richard Kaczynski, hard-working Polish-American parents. The family lived a modest, middle-class life. From the beginning, Ted was different, intensely intelligent, curious, and shy. He taught himself advanced mathematics before most children had learned multiplication. At 16, he graduated from Evergreen Park Community High School, standing out as one of the school's most gifted students. Teachers recalled his intellect as brilliant beyond measure, but noted his quiet demeanor and social isolation. In 1958, at just 16, Ted entered Harvard University on scholarship. He was the youngest student in his freshman class. But Harvard wasn't the place of discovery and mentorship he had imagined. The young prodigy found himself lost in a world of ambition, arrogance, and alienation. He struggled to make friends, often dining alone, absorbed in books, or staring silently into space. It was during these years that something shifted, subtly but decisively. Between 1959 and 1962, Ted Kaczynski took part in a series of psychological experiments led by Dr. Henry A. Murray, a respected psychologist and former intelligence officer at Harvard. The purpose of these experiments, according to university records, was to study stress and personality under pressure. But the methods were harsh. Participants were asked to write essays about their deepest beliefs and then subjected to prolonged verbal attacks, humiliation, and personal insults while being filmed. Kaczynski, then a teenager, endured over 200 hours of this psychological testing. Historians and psychologists later debated the ethical implications of these studies. While there is no verified evidence that Murray's experiment caused Kaczynski's later violence, many experts have argued that such experiences likely deepened his mistrust of authority and heightened his social detachment. Ted left Harvard in 1962, brilliant but scarred. He pursued mathematics at the University of Michigan, where he earned his PhD in 1967, writing a dissertation so advanced that only a handful of professors could understand it. His academic advisor described his mind as among the most gifted I have ever supervised. But even success couldn't mask his growing discomfort with the modern world. His letters to family revealed frustration, loneliness, and an emerging disdain for what he called the system of control and conformity. In 1969, at the age of 27, he abruptly resigned from his position as an assistant professor at UC Berkeley without explanation. Colleagues were stunned. A career that had begun with promise ended in silence. In 1971, Ted moved to a small patch of land in Lincoln, Montana, near the edge of the Helena National Forest. There, he built a 10 by 12-foot cabin with his own hands. No running water, no electricity, no phone. Neighbors described him as polite but distant. He spent his days reading philosophy, growing vegetables, and studying survival techniques. But his solitude was not just a retreat, it was a declaration. In his journals, later seized by the FBI, Ted wrote of his growing anger toward industrial society. He believed technology had enslaved humanity, robbing people of freedom, self-reliance, and authentic experience. He saw cities as machines of control and nature as the last refuge of human dignity. In the stillness of Montana's wilderness, his hatred of modern civilization began to take form. He tested small explosive devices in the woods. He documented his failures and refined his methods. He began to see violence not as evil, but as a form of protest, a way to awaken a world he believed was sleepwalking into destruction. By 1978, the Unabomber had been born. The package that exploded at Northwestern was only the beginning. Over the next few years, bombs appeared at universities and airports, cleverly disguised, meticulously constructed, and mailed to unsuspecting victims. The FBI, unable to find a clear pattern, gave the case a code name, Unabomber, short for University and Airline Bomber. The name stuck, and the legend grew. Ted Kaczynski built his devices from everyday materials, wood, wires, batteries, nails, and gunpowder, crafted entirely by hand. He used false return addresses, disguised his handwriting, and left virtually no fingerprints or DNA. His bombs were mechanical puzzles, designed with both technical precision and philosophical symbolism. Between 1978 and 1985, his attacks injured professors, airline officials, and researchers. One bomb exploded aboard American Airlines Flight 444 in 1979, filling the cabin with smoke and forcing an emergency landing. Dozens of passengers suffered from smoke inhalation, but by sheer luck, no one died. That near miss made the FBI realize the scale of the threat. This wasn't a prankster or a lone survivalist. This was a terrorist, intelligent, methodical, and patient. Ted's campaign was never random. His victims represented the very symbols of technological advancement: computer scientists, engineers, and corporate executives. In his journals, he wrote, "The system is eating the soul of humanity. The machine cannot be destroyed by words alone." In 1985, he claimed his first life. Hugh Scruton, a computer store owner in Sacramento, California. The device had been left in a parking lot disguised as a piece of debris. When Scruton picked it up, it exploded instantly. 2 years later, in 1987, another bomb injured 2 professors at the University of California, Berkeley, a symbolic return to the place where Kaczynski had once taught. Each bomb carried his signature, handcrafted wooden parts, intricate soldering, and the initials FC etched into the metal. Later, investigators would learn this stood for Freedom Club, Kaczynski's imagined revolutionary movement. By the early 1990s, he had killed 3 people and injured 23 others. But his goal wasn't just death. It was message. He wanted the world to see the cost of industrial progress, to make society feel the same pain he believed technology had inflicted on the human spirit. By the early 1990s, the FBI's Unabomber task force had grown into one of the largest in U.S. history. More than 150 agents, analysts, and forensic experts were assigned to the case. Despite advanced profiling, thousands of interviews, and over 50,000 suspects reviewed, the investigation remained deadlocked. They knew the bomber was highly intelligent, likely a recluse, and obsessed with technology, but they didn't know where he was or what his next move would be. Years passed. Then, in 1995, the Unabomber broke his silence. In June 1995, the New York Times and the Washington Post received a letter claiming to be from the Unabomber. It offered a deal. If they published his 35,000-word essay, he would stop killing. The document, titled Industrial Society and Its Future, was both a manifesto and a warning. It condemned technological progress, arguing that modern industrial society had stripped humans of autonomy and purpose. He predicted that technology would eventually dominate human behavior through surveillance, psychological conditioning, and genetic manipulation. Many of his claims were philosophical and disturbingly prophetic. After intense debate and pressure from the FBI, the Washington Post published the manifesto on September 19, 1995, hoping someone would recognize the writing. That decision would ultimately end the hunt. It was the winter of 1995, and America was gripped by fear and fascination. The Unabomber Manifesto had been published. Millions had read it, some dismissing it as the ramblings of a madman, others calling it a chilling prophecy. But for David Kaczynski, it wasn't just disturbing, it was familiar. He and his wife, Linda Patrick, lived quietly in upstate New York. One evening, while reading the manifesto in the newspaper, Linda paused. She noticed peculiar phrasings, turns of speech, patterns of logic that echoed the letters Ted had sent them years earlier. David had always known his brother was brilliant and troubled. Ted had withdrawn from family and friends, cutting contact for long periods. His letters were filled with philosophical reflections, bitterness toward technology, and disdain for modern life, but never violence. Still, something about the manifesto unsettled them. Certain phrases, the system, technological slavery, autonomy of the individual, mirrored Ted's earlier writings almost word for word. After days of agonizing discussion, David contacted a private attorney, Tony Bisegli, who then approached the FBI. At first, agents were cautious. They had received thousands of false leads over the years. But when David turned over copies of Ted's old letters and essays, the FBI's forensic linguistics team compared them with the manifesto. The linguistic fingerprints matched. The careful use of archaic words, unique syntax, and repeated ideological themes all pointed to one author. The long hunt was over. On April 3, 1996, FBI agents surrounded the remote cabin in Lincoln, Montana. The operation was silent, coordinated, and cautious. They knew the suspect might have booby-trapped the property. Agents approached carefully, rifles raised. The door creaked open, and there he was, a thin, bearded man, eyes wary, wearing a dirty jacket and torn jeans. The arrest was almost anticlimactic. Ted Kaczynski did not resist. Inside the cabin, investigators discovered a treasure trove of evidence: bomb components, chemical substances, wiring diagrams, and handwritten journals spanning decades. In those notebooks, Ted documented every attack in chilling detail, including the date, method, and rationale. They also found the original typewriter used to draft the manifesto, as well as a fully constructed live bomb ready for mailing. One FBI agent later recalled, "It was like stepping inside the mind of the Unabomber, precise, meticulous, and terrifyingly logical." The arrest sent shockwaves across the country. The mystery man behind one of the longest-running domestic terror campaigns in U.S. history was not a foreign operative, not a group, not even a team, but a single, solitary figure who had waged war against society from a wooden shack. In the months that followed, the nation's image of Ted Kaczynski began to take shape. To some, he was a deranged recluse, a man who had gone mad in the woods. To others, he was a genius-turned monster, a cautionary tale of intellect twisted by isolation. His former professors remembered him as quiet but brilliant. Former neighbors in Montana described him as polite, self-reliant, but withdrawn. His family remembered a sensitive boy who once loved mathematics and music, not a killer. But the evidence was overwhelming. Each bomb fragment matched the tools and materials found in his cabin. His typewriter matched the manifesto exactly. His journals recorded every crime. The case the FBI had built over 17 years, $50 million in investigation costs, countless false leads, had finally found its man. Kaczynski was charged with 10 federal counts, including the use of bombs that killed 3 and injured 23. The trial that followed would test not only the justice system but also the boundaries of sanity, ideology, and moral conviction. Ted Kaczynski's trial began in 1997 in Sacramento, California, under heavy security. The courtroom buzzed with tension. The media called it the trial of the century, echoing earlier cases that had captured the American imagination. At first, Kaczynski's defense team, led by Judy Clark and Quinn Denver, planned to pursue an insanity defense. They argued that Ted suffered from paranoid schizophrenia and delusional thinking, citing his isolation, grandiose beliefs, and irrational justifications for violence. But Ted refused. He saw himself not as insane, but as a revolutionary, a rational man fighting against a corrupt technological civilization. He insisted that to claim insanity would be to betray his philosophy. In his own words, "I am not mentally ill. What I did was wrong, but not irrational. I had reasons, moral reasons." His rejection of the insanity plea caused deep friction with his defense team. He demanded to represent himself, but the court denied the motion, fearing a chaotic self-defense. When he learned his lawyers had secretly prepared to introduce mental illness evidence, he erupted, calling the move a betrayal. Faced with overwhelming evidence and unwilling to accept an insanity defense, Kaczynski struck a deal with prosecutors in January 1998. He pleaded guilty to all charges in exchange for avoiding the death penalty. He was sentenced to 8 consecutive life terms without parole. The judge's words were somber. "You have caused untold pain, destroyed lives, and spread terror. You will spend the rest of your life in a place without freedom, the very thing you claim to defend." After sentencing, Ted Kaczynski was transferred to the ADX Florence Supermax prison in Colorado, the most secure federal facility in the United States. Known as the Alcatraz of the Rockies, ADX houses the nation's most dangerous criminals, terrorists, cartel leaders, and spies. Kaczynski's cell measured just 7 by 12 feet, with a concrete bed, steel sink, and a narrow slit of a window. He spent 23 hours a day in isolation, allowed out only for brief, solitary exercise in a small concrete yard. But even in confinement, his intellect remained active. He wrote letters to journalists, scholars, and environmental activists. He exchanged correspondence with individuals intrigued by his anti-technological philosophy, a fact that troubled law enforcement but fascinated sociologists. He donated his personal papers to the University of Michigan, where researchers continue to study his writings under controlled access. While many condemned his actions, others debated his ideas. Some philosophers, in academic journals, acknowledged the unsettling accuracy of his warnings about technological dependence, surveillance, and environmental degradation, though all firmly rejected his violent methods. Kaczynski, meanwhile, never expressed remorse for his crimes. He admitted regret for the pain caused to individuals, but maintained that his motives were a necessary warning. His writings remained dense, analytical, and detached, a man locked in both a cell and his own unwavering logic. The capture of the Unabomber closed one of the most expensive and exhaustive manhunts in FBI history. But the aftermath left enduring questions about genius, madness, and morality. For the FBI, the case marked a turning point. It was the first major success of forensic linguistics, the study of language patterns to identify suspects. Agents James R. Fitzgerald and Donald Foster pioneered the technique that matched Kaczynski's phrasing and syntax, establishing a precedent for later cases involving written threats, emails, and manifestos. For psychologists, Kaczynski became a case study in the dangers of intellectual isolation and ideological obsession. He wasn't driven by greed or hatred of individuals, but by a cold belief that violence could awaken moral truth, a conviction that history has seen in extremists across centuries. For his victims' families, there was no philosophy deep enough to justify their loss. Hugh Scruton, Thomas Mosser, and Gilbert Murray were remembered not as symbols, but as human beings, fathers, husbands, colleagues, taken by a man who believed their deaths would save mankind. The Unabomber's story became a mirror reflecting society's unease with technology. In an age of constant connectivity, surveillance, and data manipulation, some began to revisit his warnings, stripped of violence, but laden with relevance. In 2021, after more than 2 decades at ADX Florence, Ted Kaczynski was transferred to the Federal Medical Center in Butner, North Carolina, due to deteriorating health. On June 10, 2023, at the age of 81, he was found dead in his cell. Authorities confirmed that he had taken his own life. In the end, the man who had rejected modern medicine, technology, and the structures of civilization died under their care, a paradox as haunting as his life's work. In his final writings, discovered posthumously, he remained consistent, unrepentant, convinced that his warnings about industrial society had been ignored and that humanity was on the brink of irreversible submission to the machine. Ted Kaczynski remains one of the most complex figures in American criminal history, a man who embodied both brilliance and brutality. He asked questions that resonated. Are we losing freedom to technology? Is progress always good? But his answers came in the form of violence, messages written in blood and shrapnel. To historians, his life stands as a warning that intelligence without empathy becomes a weapon, and isolation without compassion becomes madness. To law enforcement, his case remains a triumph of perseverance, proof that even the most elusive criminal can be found through patience and science. And to the world, his story endures as a dark paradox, the genius who fled civilization, only to be consumed by the very rage it provoked. He sought to destroy the machine, one FBI agent later said, but in the end, he became part of it, a cog in history's warning to us all. If you found this story gripping, remember to like, comment, and subscribe to True Crime Spectrum, where real investigations meet cinematic storytelling. Each week, we uncover the world's most haunting true crime cases, deeply researched, powerfully told, and always authentic. Because every crime hides a truth, and every truth deserves to be told.